My name is Margaret Rains. I'm 47 years old, and last week I watched my little sister get married through a live stream from my apartment. Alone. I had received a link, not an invitation. No phone call, no mention in the speeches. Not even my name in the program. When I texted my mother to ask why, she replied, "It just felt simpler this way." I stared at the screen, smiled softly, and whispered, "Then simple it is." But this isn't just about a wedding. It's about a lifetime of being edited out of my own family's story. Before I take you deeper into that story, let me know where you're watching from. Tap like if you've ever been left out by the people who were supposed to love you the most. And stick around. Because this story isn't about revenge, it's about release. I live in a small apartment just outside of Seattle. It's not fancy, but it's peaceful. There's a big window facing the forest and a bookshelf I've built up over the years. Mostly novels, biographies, and a few cookbooks I rarely use. Most nights are quiet. I cook something simple, light a candle, and read with a blanket over my lap. I've built a life that feels stable, clean, manageable. But there are still ghosts in the silence. A few days before the wedding, I found myself scrolling through an old hard drive. Buried in a folder named Family Clips, I stumbled across a video from my 13th birthday. I almost didn't open it. But curiosity won. The video was grainy, the sound uneven. My dad was holding the camera, narrating badly as usual. There were balloons, mismatched paper plates, a cake from Safeway. And there was me, sitting on the far side of the table, half out of frame. Everyone was laughing, singing. My sister Meryl, just 6 years old, sat on someone's lap at the center of the frame, right in front of the cake, giggling like a starlet. At one point, I turned toward the camera and said something, but Dad's voice covered mine with a loud, "Smile, Meryl," and the camera zoomed in on her face. It was like watching the truth in slow motion. I wasn't erased. I was simply disregarded. 100 tiny cuts over the years, not brutal, just consistent. When I graduated top of my class in college, no one flew in to attend the ceremony. When Meryl got her first job in advertising, the whole family drove out and threw a dinner party. I remember once, after a bad breakup, I called home just to talk. My mom picked up, said, "Hold on, let me call you back," and never did. 2 weeks later, she texted to say she was so proud of Meryl's new client account. So no, this wedding snub wasn't new. It was just louder. Still, I wanted to believe the link was an oversight. I told myself maybe they were trying to be modern, considerate. Maybe seating was limited. Maybe they assumed I wouldn't want to come. But that night, on a quiet whim, I called my mother. Just to ask, to clarify. She answered on the second ring. "Oh," she said after I mentioned the wedding. Her voice didn't even flicker with surprise or guilt. "We just thought it'd be simpler that way. No pressure, you know? And honestly, we didn't want to make Meryl feel uncomfortable. She said she wasn't sure how you two would get along." She said it like I was an ex-boyfriend they were trying to keep off the guest list, not her daughter, not Meryl's sister. I said, "I understand because that's what I've been taught to say. I've been trained to be understanding, to take up less space, to make excuses for people who won't make any for me." After we hung up, I sat in silence. Then I opened the invitation link. Not because I wanted to see the wedding. I already knew what it would look like. Glossy. Perfect. Curated for Instagram. But I needed to see what it looked like to be uninvited and still watching. And when I saw my name nowhere on the screen, not even as a guest joining remotely, I understood something deeper than rejection. I was a stranger, by design, and I had a choice to make. The morning after the wedding, I made myself coffee and sat at the kitchen table, still in my robe. The apartment was quiet except for the ticking clock above the sink and the low hum of the refrigerator. I hadn't cried. Not last night. Not this morning. But I felt something hollow inside me, like a rib had gone missing in my sleep. I opened my laptop and rewatched the wedding footage, not because I'm a glutton for pain, but because I wanted to understand where exactly I disappeared. There were clips of guests arriving, smiling, hugging. A slideshow of childhood photos played on a screen behind the couple's sweetheart table. Meryl at age 4 with cake on her face, Meryl in a Halloween costume, Meryl and Mom on vacation in Sedona. Not one frame of me, not even in the background. My mother gave a toast. Her voice, warm and glowing, said things like, "From the moment Meryl was born, I knew she was special, and she's always brought light into our lives." Everyone clapped. Meryl blushed. Dad beamed. I looked around my apartment, at the half-drunk mug of coffee, the plants I'd nursed through 3 winters, the books I'd read and underlined and kept like friends. None of it applauded. That's when I realized, this wasn't a new wound. This was just the newest layer. My role in the family had always been the helper. The one who drove to pick up Dad when his car battery died. The one who proofread Meryl's resumes. The one who quietly transferred money when Mom needed help paying the heating bill. But never the one they celebrated. Never the one they centered. And maybe I had let it happen. Years ago, I told myself that if I just worked harder, stayed kinder, didn't complain, they'd notice. They'd see me. They'd say, "Margaret, we're so proud of you." But the truth is, they liked me best when I was silent, when I stayed just out of frame. I closed the laptop. I picked up my phone, stared at the last message from my mother. It just felt simpler this way. Then I typed, "Thanks for the link. Everything looked beautiful." I deleted it before sending. That felt like a small revolution. Instead, I opened my photo gallery and found a picture I'd taken a few weeks earlier, me standing at the edge of a hiking trail, mist curling around the evergreens. I looked calm, present, real. I posted it on social media with no caption. Minutes later, Meryl liked it. I stared at her name on the screen. No message, no comment. Just a tap of approval from the bride who hadn't made room for her sister at her wedding. It was bizarre how something so tiny could feel like both an insult and a plea. I set my phone down and took a deep breath. There's a strange kind of grief that comes with being the one who always understood, who always forgave, always gave more than she got. It's the grief of realizing you were never actually misunderstood. You were understood perfectly, and still disregarded. That was the morning I decided to stop translating myself into a language they refused to learn. I wasn't angry, not yet. But I was done pretending this was okay, done pretending invisibility was some kind of grace. They had written me out of their story. So I started writing my own. I once read that family loyalty is supposed to feel like safety, a harbor. But for me, it always felt more like debt. Over the years, I had quietly become the family's invisible safety net. Not because they asked, at least not always, but because I thought that if I gave enough, one day, I'd be seen. I can't count how many rent payments I helped cover for Meryl when she first moved to Los Angeles. I never made her feel guilty. I just transferred the money and sent a text that said, "Don't worry, you'll land something soon." When my father's back surgery wasn't fully covered by insurance, I was the one who pulled from my emergency savings and wired the gap without hesitation. Mom never thanked me, but she did call the next week to ask if I'd be home for Easter, as if nothing had changed. They never said, "We couldn't have done this without you," and I never asked them to. At work, I handled billion-dollar negotiations with grace. But at home, I tiptoed around fragile egos and unspoken expectations. Every time I offered support, I told myself I was investing in love, that eventually it would pay off in warmth, or at the very least, inclusion. But love shouldn't feel like a transaction. One winter, during a particularly brutal snowstorm, Meryl called crying. Her power had gone out, her car battery was dead, and her landlord wasn't answering. She was terrified and freezing. Without a second thought, I called a local hotel, paid for 3 nights up front, and ordered hot food to be delivered to her door. I didn't even get a thank you text until a week later, and even then, it was just a meme of a smiling bear that said, "You're the best." I laughed at the time. Because if I didn't laugh, I'd unravel. That was the thing about being the reliable one. People came to rely on you, but not necessarily to respect you. You became a convenience, a background system, something that worked so efficiently it didn't need acknowledgement, and I played my part well. I sent birthday cards with little notes. I made phone calls on holidays. I showed up when no one else did. But I started noticing how one-sided it all was. How many times I asked, "How are you doing?" and got long monologues in return, yet no one ever asked me back. It's a strange thing to be surrounded by people and still feel utterly alone, so I began pulling back in tiny ways. I stopped offering before being asked. I started letting texts go unanswered for a few hours, then a day. I began saying no to things that once felt obligatory. At first, no one noticed. Then, slowly, the silence from my end made them uncomfortable. I remember one afternoon I got a voicemail from Mom, her tone clipped. "Margaret, just checking in. You've been quiet lately. Hope everything's okay." No, we miss you. No, is there something wrong? Just suspicion, as if my absence was an offense. But I wasn't trying to offend anyone. I was just trying to see if I still existed without all the giving. Turns out I did, but not to them. And that realization hit harder than I expected, because all those years I thought I was building a bridge. What I didn't realize was I was the only one crossing it. There's something uniquely painful about drifting away from people who never realized they were the center of your world. The first time I skipped a family gathering, it was Christmas. I told them work was too demanding that week, which wasn't exactly a lie, but the truth was, I couldn't bear the thought of sitting through another dinner where I felt like a placeholder. I remember that evening clearly. I made myself a simple meal, lit a pine-scented candle, and sat on the couch in my flannel pajamas while "It's a Wonderful Life" played in the background. The phone didn't ring, no one asked where I was. I checked Meryl's Instagram. She'd posted a carousel of glossy photos from the family's dinner. The table was decked out with garlands and candles, champagne flutes glittering in the background. There was a group photo in front of the tree. Mom, Dad, Meryl, her fiancé Logan, even a few cousins who'd flown in from Florida. I wasn't in any of them, not even mentioned. A few years ago, that might have crushed me. But that night, I just felt numb. Like I had been erased so thoroughly, even the ache had nowhere left to sit. I started to pay attention to the ways I'd been made invisible over the years. Not by malice, not with cruelty, just by a steady diet of exclusion. When I tried to talk about a recent promotion, Mom would interrupt with, "Oh, Meryl just got offered a trip to Paris for work." If I mentioned starting a new book club, Dad would chuckle and say, "That's cute, but you've always been more of a loner, haven't you?" No one said it outright, but the message was clear. You're not who we hoped for. You're not the favorite story to tell. And slowly, I stopped offering pieces of myself to a room that never asked. It wasn't always silence. Sometimes, it was noise that drowned me out. One Thanksgiving, I spent hours helping in the kitchen, preparing pies from scratch, setting the table with hand-folded napkins. When we sat down to eat, my mother stood to give thanks. She looked around, smiled, and said, "We're just so grateful for Meryl, who flew all the way home to be with us." That was it. No mention of who cooked, or who had arrived early to clean the guest bathroom, or who had quietly paid for the groceries when Mom's card got declined at the checkout. Just Meryl. As always. I bit my tongue, laughed at the appropriate moments, and when the meal was over, I drove home in silence. I didn't turn on the radio, I didn't cry, I just stared at the highway, mile after mile, wondering what it would feel like to be missed. It's easy to assume that the quiet ones are content, that if someone doesn't complain, they must be fine. But there's a grief that builds in the silence, a weight that settles into your bones when you realize you could vanish, and the world you grew up in would keep spinning exactly the same. That winter, I started spending more weekends by myself. I hiked. I cooked for one. I joined a local ceramics class where no one knew my last name. I learned how to be alone, and more than that, how to like it. Not because I gave up on family, but because I couldn't keep begging for a seat at a table that was never set for me in the first place. Hope is a stubborn thing. Even when it's been bruised and neglected, it clings to the edges of your heart like a child waiting at the window. The morning of Meryl's wedding, I woke up early. The ceremony wasn't until the afternoon, but I found myself moving around the apartment with a nervous kind of energy. I cleaned the kitchen, rearranged the plants on the windowsill, fluffed the pillows on the couch. Everything felt too quiet, too still, like I was trying to sweep up the space between who I was and who I wanted to be on this day. I opened my closet and stared at the row of dresses hanging like question marks. Most of them were work attire, structured, simple, forgettable. But wedged in the back was a soft blue wrap dress with a subtle shimmer. I'd bought it a year ago on impulse, imagining I'd wear it to some future event where I'd finally feel seen. I hadn't worn it once, until now. As I slipped it on, something about the fabric felt gentle, like I was showing up for myself, even if no one else had asked me to. I curled my hair, added a hint of lipstick, and poured a glass of Chardonnay I'd been saving for a special occasion. Then I set up my laptop on the kitchen counter, lit a candle nearby, and clicked on the wedding link. The live stream loaded slowly, buffering on a frozen image of white roses and golden chairs. When it finally cleared, the ceremony had already begun. I wasn't surprised. There was Meryl, standing under a floral arch, glowing in her designer gown. Logan, the groom, looked polished, slightly nervous, like he'd rehearsed sincerity in the mirror. The guests sat in perfect rows, smiling, sun-drenched, laughing too hard at jokes that weren't that funny. I scanned the screen looking for familiar faces. Mom was front row, dabbing her eyes with a silk handkerchief. Dad stood near the aisle, arms crossed but proud. They all looked so at home in that scene, so complete. There was no space for me, not even virtually. Still, I watched. I watched because some part of me needed to, because no matter how far I'd pulled back, I still carried this deep, aching want to belong, to matter. A few minutes in, someone stepped up to the mic to give a toast. It was Dave, one of Logan's old friends from college. He spoke with the breezy confidence of someone who'd had just enough champagne to be dangerous. "So," Dave laughed, "when Logan first told me about this girl he met at the kitten club, I thought he was joking. Like, come on. What kind of guy meets his future wife at a velvet booth with bottle service and a 2-drink minimum?" There was a ripple of awkward laughter, then a stiff silence. Meryl's smile faltered for a second. The camera panned briefly to Logan, whose jaw tensed. I froze. The Kitten Club. That name triggered something faint and familiar. A fragment of a conversation I'd overheard months ago, maybe even years. Rumors, a woman, a situation that was quietly buried. It wasn't a bombshell, it wasn't scandalous, at least not to me. It was confirmation, not of betrayal, but of the illusion they had so carefully curated. Meryl wasn't the golden girl. Logan wasn't the charming prince. And this wedding wasn't a fairy tale. It was theater. And I was just a quiet audience member, sipping wine in the dark, watching the set wobble. But for the first time, I felt no desire to warn anyone, no urge to intervene, let the curtain fall. I wasn't part of the cast. The thing about perfect moments is that they rarely survive too much attention. After Dave's toast, there was a pause that lasted just a few beats too long. Someone coughed. A woman in a pale pink dress reached for her champagne with a little too much urgency. The DJ tried to cover the tension by starting up a mellow instrumental track, but the damage had been done. I watched from my kitchen counter as the cracks began to show. Logan leaned in toward Meryl, whispering something sharp. Her expression changed, just slightly, but enough to catch. It was the kind of micro-moment you wouldn't notice if you were sitting at the reception, sipping wine, caught up in small talk. But through a screen, with no distractions, I saw it clearly. The way she blinked too fast, the way her fingers curled slightly at her sides. They made it through the rest of the formalities, vows, cake cutting, first dance. But the rhythm was off. There was a stiffness now, a delay between their movements. They weren't moving together anymore. They were navigating around each other. It felt like watching a glass table wobble, still standing, but you knew it wouldn't take much. At one point, the video cut briefly to a wide shot of the reception space. In the background, near the catering station, I spotted Mom speaking with one of the servers. She gestured toward something out of frame, then looked around, scanning the room. Her expression was tight, controlled, but not at ease. Then came the moment. The music paused unexpectedly. Logan raised his voice, only slightly, but enough to be picked up by the ambient mic near the head table. "That's not what we agreed on," he snapped. Meryl replied, her tone sharper than I'd ever heard it. "Then maybe you shouldn't have made a toast about strip clubs in front of my grandmother." Guests froze. Someone dropped a fork. A man in the back chuckled uncomfortably, the sound echoing through the silence like a wrong note in a choir. Then the unmistakable sound of a glass breaking. The camera jerked slightly as if the person holding it had flinched. The image blurred, then refocused just in time to catch Meryl standing, one hand clenched at her side, her face flushed and furious. Logan stood too, but his body language was less defensive and more disoriented. Like he was realizing the stage had shifted under his feet. The live stream lagged for a moment. When it returned, the screen had frozen on a frame of the two of them mid-argument, her mouth open in mid-sentence, his eyes somewhere far away. Then it stopped entirely. Just like that. The broadcast was over. I sat there blinking at the blank screen. The soft flicker of the candle beside me was the only movement in the room. I didn't feel triumphant or vindicated. I didn't want any of this to happen. But I wasn't devastated either. Instead, I felt something unfamiliar and quiet, like exhaling after holding your breath underwater for too long. I stood, walked to the sink, and rinsed my glass. In the reflection of the darkened kitchen window, I caught a glimpse of myself. Hair curled, lipstick still intact. a blue shimmer catching the light just right on my dress, and a smile. Small, almost imperceptible. But it was there. Not a smile of cruelty, not even satisfaction, just release. The curtain had fallen, and for once I didn't have to stay and clean up the stage. The morning after the wedding felt too quiet. I sat in the living room with my second cup of coffee, the one I usually poured out of habit rather than need. Outside, the sky was overcast, casting a dull gray across the tops of the pine trees. It was the kind of light that made everything feel softer, almost like the world was whispering. My phone buzzed for the 5th time in under an hour. I didn't even check it. I knew what it was. Texts, missed calls, voice messages. Not from friends, not from colleagues, from family. From people who hadn't noticed when I was missing but suddenly seemed panicked now that I hadn't rushed to fix what they'd broken. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me. I picked up the phone and unlocked it. 6 missed calls from my mother, 2 from my father, a handful of messages from cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. Most of them were vague. "Hey, can we talk? Not sure what happened last night. Call me? We could really use your help right now." And then there was the one that made me set the phone back down. It was from Mom. "Margaret, I need you to help take down the video. It's all over the family group chat. People are panicking. Meryl's crying. Just fix it." There was no greeting. No, "How are you?" No, "I'm sorry you had to see that." Just a direct order, like I was still the one expected to show up with duct tape and emotional superglue. It was almost funny. Almost. I looked at the laptop still sitting on the kitchen counter. The screen was black now, but the image of Meryl's face mid-yell and Logan's expression of dawning horror had burned itself into my memory. And me? I was still wearing the same dress, still had the faint scent of Chardonnay on my skin. But something inside had shifted. I sat back on the couch and looked around. The room was still, peaceful. Mine. For years I'd carried this unspoken role. Family fixer, peacekeeper, the quiet one who knew everyone's secrets and never spilled them. I was the person they called when flights were missed, jobs were lost, or bank accounts ran dry. But they didn't call to share joy. They didn't call when Meryl got engaged. They didn't call when I got promoted. They didn't call just to hear my voice. They only called when something went wrong, and now something had gone wrong. But I didn't feel the usual urgency to step in. Instead, I stared at the message and asked myself a question I hadn't dared to voice until now. What if I just didn't? What if I didn't explain, didn't justify, didn't repair? What if I let the silence speak for me? It was a radical thought, terrifying almost. Because for so long my value had been tethered to my usefulness, not my presence, not my perspective, just my ability to absorb and solve. And if I took that away, what was left? I reached for my phone again, read Mom's message one more time, and then turned the screen off. I wasn't going to reply. Not yet. Instead, I walked to my closet, slowly unzipped the dress, and hung it back in its place. I folded the cardigan I'd thrown over the chair. I washed the wine glass in the sink. I moved through my home like someone reclaiming their own rhythm. It's strange how quiet rebellion can be. There was no dramatic speech, no slammed doors, just stillness, intention. A refusal to participate in the emotional economy that had kept me indebted for decades. I didn't delete the wedding link. I didn't leak it either. I simply let it sit, let them handle their own fallout, let the chaos swirl without me in the eye of the storm. And for the first time in my adult life, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. The call came just after noon. I let it ring 3 times before I answered. "Margaret." My mother's voice snapped into the room, tight with urgency. "Thank God. I've been trying to reach you all morning." I didn't say anything right away. I walked slowly back to the couch, phone to my ear, letting the silence stretch. She filled it quickly. "We need you to do something. That video, it's circulating in the family chat, and I don't know who sent it to Aunt Rhonda, but she's been calling nonstop. This whole thing is turning into a mess." I looked out the window. The trees were swaying gently. Somewhere nearby, someone was mowing their lawn. It felt like the world had agreed not to care about weddings falling apart. "I know Meryl's upset," she continued, her voice rising and falling in that familiar pattern of rehearsed concern. "But I think if we can get ahead of this, clean it up quickly maybe." I cut in. Why are you calling me? She paused. Because I thought you could help. You're good at this kind of thing. I waited a beat. You mean fixing what other people break? She sighed. Don't do that, please. This isn't about you. There it was, that sentence. This isn't about you. The phrase that had followed me since childhood like a shadow. At school plays, when Meryl forgot her lines and cried on stage, and I was the one who got scolded for not comforting her fast enough. At birthdays, when my gifts were practical and hers were glittering, and I was told to be gracious because she was more sensitive. At the hospital, when Dad had surgery, and I sat through the night holding his hand, but Mom told everyone it was Meryl who really held the family together. And now, again, when the world had witnessed their carefully curated fairy tale wobble and collapse, and I was the one expected to make it disappear. This isn't about me? I repeated, my voice soft but steady. Then why am I the one you call when things go wrong? Mom didn't answer right away. I heard her breathe in, heard the shift in tone when she realized this conversation wasn't going to follow the usual script. I just thought you'd want to help, she said finally. For Meryl, for the family. I nodded slowly, even though she couldn't see me. I spent years helping, I said. Helping with rent, helping with emergencies, helping without being asked because I thought that's what love looked like. But I was wrong. She started to speak, but I didn't let her. You know what I remember most about growing up? I asked. It wasn't the holidays or the vacations or the birthday cakes. It was how I always had to shrink, to not take up space, to understand, to adjust, to absorb. While Meryl shined, I learned how to fold myself small so I wouldn't make anyone uncomfortable. That's not true, she said quickly, defensively. Isn't it? I said. You sent me a wedding link, not an invitation. You didn't want me there, but you wanted me here, cleaning up, quietly, like always. Her voice cracked. That wasn't the intention. But it was the impact, I said, softer now, and I'm done pretending that doesn't matter. A long silence followed. For a moment I thought she might say something real, something brave, but instead I heard the old pattern return. Well, I don't know what you want me to say. I smiled, not out of joy, but out of clarity. You don't have to say anything, Mom, that's the point. This time I'm not fixing it. I ended the call. The line went dead. I exhaled slowly, as if I'd been holding my breath since childhood. The air in my apartment felt different, lighter somehow. And as I set the phone face down on the table, I realized I hadn't just ended a conversation. I'd ended a contract, the one I never signed, but somehow always followed. Until now. After the call ended, I didn't cry. I thought I might. I thought the dam would finally break. But there were no tears left to spill. Just a strange, almost eerie calm. I sat in my armchair, legs tucked beneath me, holding a cup of lukewarm coffee I'd forgotten to drink. The apartment around me was quiet except for the occasional creak in the floorboards and the soft whir of the fridge. Outside, the world carried on like nothing had shifted, but something had. Not loud, not explosive, just permanent. It felt like stepping outside after a long, slow storm, only to realize the landscape had changed, subtly, completely. I leaned my head back against the cushion and closed my eyes. And for the first time in a long time, I let the reel play, the one I always rewound, fast-forwarded, or muted, all those small moments that had once felt disconnected. The family dinner where I offered to help clean up and Mom waved me off, only to gush over how Meryl worked so hard on the centerpiece. The vacation where I stayed behind with Dad when he felt sick, while everyone else went wine tasting, and no one remembered to bring me back anything. The graduation party I paid for myself, the countless text threads I was left out of. It was like flipping through a photo album where you appear in every image, but always just out of focus. I used to explain it away. I told myself it was circumstantial, that families get busy, that love looks different for everyone. But deep down, I knew. I'd been a convenience, a utility, the one they could count on because they knew I would never ask them to count on me. That realization hit me harder than any insult ever could. I stood up, suddenly needing to move, to do something with my hands. I opened the closet where I kept my old journals, the ones I hadn't looked at in years. I flipped through pages filled with neat handwriting, carefully worded reflections, observations, attempts to understand. One entry caught my eye. I was 24 when I wrote it. Maybe if I'm good enough, helpful enough, they'll stop forgetting I'm here. I closed the notebook. Somewhere along the line, I had accepted invisibility as a form of safety. If I wasn't seen, I couldn't be rejected. If I didn't ask, I couldn't be refused. But that strategy only works for so long. Eventually, silence becomes its own kind of scream. I walked into the kitchen, poured out the coffee, and rinsed the mug. My hands moved slowly, almost ceremonially. Then I sat back down and opened my laptop. Not to work, not to write an email, but to look. To see clearly, maybe for the first time, what I had been too busy compensating for to acknowledge. I opened my banking app. All the quiet transactions stared back at me. Rent payments, emergency transfers, groceries delivered to apartments that weren't mine, bills paid just this once that had somehow become routine. I clicked through months, then years. I wasn't angry. I was done being angry. But I did feel something rising, something clean, steady, clarity. I wasn't bitter about what I gave. I gave freely. But giving had become a role, not a choice. And I was finally choosing to step out of that role. Not out of spite, but out of self-respect. That day, I didn't make any grand declarations. I didn't call anyone back. I didn't post vague messages on social media. I simply acknowledged the truth. And once you do that, you can't unknow it. The story I'd been telling myself for years, that if I just tried harder, they'd see me. That story no longer held up. They saw me. They just didn't choose me. And that's a truth I could live with. Because now, I was choosing myself. That afternoon, I opened a spreadsheet I hadn't touched in over a year. I used to be proud of how organized I was. Every transfer, every expense, every helpful little favor logged neatly with dates and notes. Rent supplements for Meryl, co-pays for Dad's physical therapy, a Venmo transfer labeled last-minute tux deposit from 3 years ago. At first glance, it looked like generosity. But the longer I stared at the numbers, the more it began to resemble a quiet kind of bleeding. Each row a reminder of how often I'd stepped in before being asked, how often I had acted like a first responder to fires I didn't start. I scrolled through the most recent entries. Last month, $500 for a bridal emergency. Never explained. 3 weeks ago, $122.50 for flowers my mother insisted be billed to my account. "It's just easier, you're already online," she'd said. 2 days before the wedding, a catering deposit I covered after a frantic text from Meryl that simply read, "Please, I'll pay you back." She never did. I closed the file. My breathing was steady, calm. Then I did something I had never done before. I logged into my bank account and canceled the auto-pay to Mom and Dad's mortgage top-up. I paused the recurring grocery gift card I sent Meryl on the 1st of every month. I deleted the saved profiles from my budgeting app labeled Family and Emergencies. It wasn't about punishment. It was about permission. Permission to stop showing up for people who only noticed my presence when it made their lives easier. Permission to say, "That's not my problem," without guilt curling inside my chest like smoke. Permission to keep what I earned and decide where it went. I closed the laptop and sat there in the silence. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like oxygen. Later that night, I ordered takeout, Thai food, enough for 2, though I was alone. I poured a glass of wine, lit a candle, and pulled out a book I hadn't made time to read in weeks. Halfway through the meal, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Meryl. "Mom said you're mad. Look, I didn't mean for you to feel left out. Everything just got complicated. Can we talk?" I stared at the message. There were 100 possible replies. Most of them polite. Most of them built to smooth things over. To explain my hurt in terms soft enough for her to digest. But I didn't owe her that anymore. Instead, I turned the phone face down. Because this was not my emergency. This was not my mess to clean. And if I had to be the villain in their version of the story to be the hero in my own, so be it. I was done being generous with people who were stingy with kindness. That night, as I curled into bed, something in my chest felt both lighter and sore, the way muscles feel after being used properly for the first time in years. It wasn't bitterness, it wasn't pride, it was relief. I didn't need to be rescued from my family. I just needed to stop rescuing them. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. I hadn't set an alarm. I just opened my eyes and felt awake in a way I hadn't for years. Not rushed, not overwhelmed, just present. The apartment was still. The early light cast a soft blush across the walls. For the first time in weeks, I didn't reach for my phone. Instead, I made tea, not coffee. Something gentle, something slow. I took the mug to the balcony, wrapped myself in a shawl, and listened to the morning. It was absurd how quiet life could be when you stopped letting other people's noise dictate your rhythm. For years, I'd lived like a tuning fork, vibrating at whatever frequency my family struck. If Meryl was upset, I shifted. If Mom was anxious, I softened. If Dad grew distant, I leaned in harder. I thought that's what being a good daughter, a good sister meant. But somewhere along the way, I forgot to ask what it meant to be good to myself. I stared out at the treetops swaying in the wind, sunlight just beginning to sneak between the branches. And then I smiled. Not a sharp smile, not one of triumph, a soft one. The kind you give yourself when no one's watching, when you've made it through something invisible and real. I thought back to the wedding, to the moment the screen froze, to the sound of a glass breaking in the distance, to the stillness in my chest as I watched it all unfold. I hadn't realized it then, but that had been the moment I let go. I didn't flinch, I didn't panic, I didn't reach for my phone to mediate or explain or manage anyone's discomfort. I just sat in my kitchen, hands folded, watching it burn, not because I wanted it to, but because I knew it wasn't mine to put out. I'd spent a lifetime thinking I was the linchpin, the quiet one who held the chaos together, the emotional insurance policy for people who didn't know how to pay their own dues. But they had never asked me to be that person, and I had never asked myself if I wanted to be. That morning on the balcony, I thought about how much of my life had been defined by reaction, how many of my decisions were responses to other people's needs, fears, failures. It was sobering and oddly empowering. I didn't want to be reactive anymore. I wanted to be intentional. I finished my tea and went back inside. I opened the windows wide, let the breeze in. I turned on music, soft jazz humming low through the speakers. Then I did something so ordinary it felt radical. I sat down and opened a blank notebook. Not a spreadsheet, not a calendar, not a list of obligations, just a page. And I wrote 3 words at the top: what I want. I stared at the sentence for a long time. It felt unfamiliar, like trying on a coat that finally fit after years of squeezing into borrowed ones. Then I started writing, not big things, not wild dreams, just small, honest truths. I want to walk without guilt. I want to eat alone and feel full. I want to be loved in a way that doesn't ask me to vanish first. The list grew slowly, carefully. By the end of it, I looked down at the page and saw something I hadn't felt in a long time. A self, not the sister, not the fixer, not the responsible one. Just me. It only took 36 hours for the panic to set in. The text shifted from vague concern to controlled alarm. Please call me back, we're trying to get ahead of this. The video is still circulating. Meryl hasn't left her room. Mom's a mess. Don't do this, Margaret. That last one made me pause, as if silence was an act of sabotage, as if choosing peace over performance was somehow an attack. I didn't answer. I didn't even flinch. By then, I'd deleted the family group chat thread from my phone, blocked notifications from Meryl, muted Mom's number, not out of spite, just necessity. For the first time, I wasn't interested in managing anyone else's feelings. I wasn't scrambling to minimize embarrassment or smooth over dysfunction with carefully chosen words. Let them feel it. Let them sit in the awkward. Let them notice the space where I used to be. Meanwhile, I took a walk. It was a cold morning, but the sun was sharp and clear. The kind of morning that felt honest, unapologetic. I walked the long path through the park near my apartment, past the old elm trees and the duck pond and the little wooden bridge where teenagers carved their names into the railing. I didn't bring headphones, no music, no distractions, just my breath, the sound of my boots on gravel, my own quiet presence. I passed a couple walking a dog, a man jogging with determination, an elderly woman feeding the birds from a paper bag. No one needed anything from me. No one expected a thing. I was just a woman moving forward in her own rhythm. By the time I got home, my phone had 13 new messages. One from my mother said, "We need to talk, Margaret. This is not okay." That was the moment I finally laughed. Not mean, not mocking, just quietly stunned. Because for the first time, I realized something important. They weren't unraveling because of what I'd done. They were unraveling because I hadn't done anything. No response, no effort, no rescue, My absence was louder than any confrontation ever could be. It's strange how people only notice the weight you carry when you put it down. I made tea, took a long shower, sat by the window and let the afternoon pass without urgency. Outside, the world kept turning. Inside, I kept choosing not to pick up what wasn't mine. By nightfall, a message came through from an unknown number. Margaret, it's Logan. I know things are a mess right now, but I just want to say I'm sorry. For everything. For how you were treated. You didn't deserve that. I hope you're okay. I stared at the text for a long time, and for the first time in this entire saga I felt something unexpected. Validation. Not from the people who owed it to me, but from someone who never pretended I didn't exist. I didn't write back. I didn't need to. Some truths are loudest in their silence. 2 days later, I walked into a conference room downtown, portfolio under my arm, lipstick sharp, blouse buttoned to the collar. It was a routine client review, nothing special. A quarterly update with a mid-size firm our agency had taken on a few months ago. I'd seen the agenda, knew the talking points, was ready to get in and out without fuss, until I saw the name on the roster. Logan Whitaker. It was printed at the bottom of the slide deck, next to New Brand Strategist Introductions. I froze for just half a second. My hand hovered over the mouse pad. Then I clicked forward to the next slide and kept moving. The meeting started like any other. Corporate greetings, paper rustling, coffee cups being adjusted, a bit of nervous small talk from the junior associates. Then the glass door opened and Logan stepped in. His face dropped the second he saw me. To his credit, he recovered quickly, smiled, nodded, but I could see it in his eyes. That flicker of panic, recognition wrapped in dread. I didn't say a word. I let him sit. I let him sweat. Then I began the meeting. Good morning, everyone, I said evenly. I'm Margaret Rains, Senior Client Director. I'll be leading today's session. Logan blinked. His mouth opened slightly like he wanted to interrupt. But he didn't. Smart move. I clicked through the first few slides, outlined the numbers, made my points clearly. The room followed my pace. Logan scribbled in his notebook without looking up. His hands were a little too tight, his shoulders tense. He was no longer the confident groom at the altar, no longer the man with a mic in his hand and a spotlight over his head. Now he was just an employee, in a room, where I led. After 15 minutes, I paused and looked directly at him. Logan, I said, smooth and unshaken, since you'll be handling the brand refresh from your team's side, I'd like to hear your thoughts on the cohesion of your messaging so far. What's working, what's falling short, and how you plan to address that heading into Q4. He swallowed, hard, then cleared his throat. Well, sure, he said, reaching for a page that looked suspiciously blank. I think there are areas where we need to, refocus. I held his gaze the entire time. He didn't finish his sentence. He didn't need to. The power dynamic had shifted, and we both knew it. But here's the thing. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I didn't twist the knife. I stayed professional, courteous, completely in control. Because this wasn't about revenge. This was about reality. There was a time I would have bent over backward to make him comfortable, to ease the tension, to protect the fragile balance of a relationship that wasn't even mine. But not anymore. Now I let the discomfort do what it was meant to do. I let him feel what I had spent a lifetime mastering, being small in a room that wasn't built for you. When the meeting ended, Logan stayed behind for a moment. He walked up slowly, paper still in hand. Margaret, he said, voice low. I didn't know you'd be here. I smiled politely. I'm always here, I replied. You just never noticed. Then I picked up my folder and walked out. No vindication, no need for more. Some moments don't require closure. They just need to happen. The next evening, my phone rang during dinner. Not a text, not a voicemail, an actual call. I stared at the screen, fork paused midair. The name blinked up at me like a trick of the light. Mom. I almost let it ring out of principle. But something in me, curiosity maybe, made me answer. Hello? She didn't waste time. Margaret, can you talk? Her voice was low, brittle, like someone trying to pretend they weren't already unraveling. I leaned back in my chair. I'm listening. There was a pause, long enough to be awkward. Then, things have gotten complicated. I didn't respond. I mean, it's not just about the video anymore. It's everything. Logan's been avoiding Meryl. People are asking questions. Your uncle made a comment in the group thread about how we always handled things poorly. Your father hasn't spoken to anyone since Tuesday. And Meryl, her voice caught. What about her? She's not doing well, she's confused, hurt, and now Logan's been reassigned at work and… I stopped her. He hasn't been reassigned, I said. He's just no longer protected. She went silent. I heard her breathing, soft and shallow, like she was sifting through what to say next. Finally, Margaret, we didn't mean to exclude you. I almost laughed. You didn't mean to, I echoed, but you did. It wasn't malicious, we just didn't think about me. I know, she sighed. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. There was a tension in the line now, the kind that comes when the old script stops working. I'm not calling to argue, she said. I'm calling because we need you. I looked around my apartment, at the warm light on the bookshelf, the half-finished dinner, the windows open to the evening breeze. No, I said quietly. You need what I used to give. That's not fair. Isn't it? I asked. When I showed up early to clean the house before holidays, no one noticed. When I covered Meryl's missed rent, no one thanked me. When I sat at your kitchen table listening to everyone's problems, no one asked me how I was. That's not true. It is, and it's okay. I'm not blaming you anymore, but I'm not coming back either. Silence. Then something in her voice shifted. A fracture, small but real. I don't know how we got here, she whispered. And for the first time, I believed her. Because I knew she wasn't cruel, just careless. And sometimes that hurts more. I do, I said. We got here one overlooked moment at a time. She didn't argue. For once, she didn't try to smooth it over. She just sat with it. Can I call you again sometime? She asked. Maybe, I said. But not because there's a crisis. Okay. The call ended with no promises, no performative apologies, no sudden revelations, just space. And that was enough. I went back to my dinner, reheated it in the microwave, sat down again at the table. Outside, the sky was starting to shift into evening, a soft purple bruising the clouds, wind through the trees like a whisper. I took a bite. Still warm, still mine. And I didn't feel needed. I felt whole. The next morning I woke up before sunrise, not from anxiety, from stillness. It was the kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty, the kind that feels earned. I made tea and stood by the window as the sky shifted from charcoal to silver. Light crept in slow, careful streaks. The world didn't rush to meet me, and I didn't rush to meet it. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. A car door closed. Life went on. So did I. There was a time I would have spent this morning writing long emails, making calls, apologizing for things I didn't do, offering bridges to people who'd long forgotten what it meant to meet me halfway. But not anymore. I didn't owe anyone a statement. My absence had already spoken louder than any explanation could. That day I did normal things. I changed the sheets, I reorganized the pantry, I ran a load of laundry I'd been putting off for a week. Every act felt like a ritual, a soft reclaiming. In the afternoon I went to the bookstore. The clerk smiled and asked if I was looking for anything in particular. No, I said, just something quiet. She handed me a novel with a worn spine and a gentle title. I didn't even read the back cover. I took it home like a secret. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low, I sat on the porch with a blanket over my knees and read the first chapter out loud. To no one. Just because I wanted to hear my own voice fill a space. I hadn't realized how long I'd gone without that. My voice had always been tempered, modulated, made softer to soothe, smaller to fit. But here, now, alone in the golden hour, I read like I meant it. I read like someone who belonged to herself. No one interrupted. No one changed the subject. No one looked away. That was the most surprising part, the way silence made room for me. Not the kind of silence that comes from being ignored, but the kind you step into willingly, like a clearing in the woods, the kind of silence that doesn't erase you, it reveals you. At one point, I closed the book and just sat. No thoughts, no agenda, just me. Present, breathing, alive. I didn't need to perform my piece for anyone, didn't need to post about it, didn't need validation. Because it wasn't about being right, it was about being free. That night, before I went to bed, I opened my phone one last time. There were new messages. From Meryl, from Dad, even from a cousin I hadn't heard from in years. I didn't open any of them, not out of bitterness, just clarity. I'd spent so many years waiting to be invited into their world. Turns out I didn't need an invitation. I just needed to leave, and sometimes walking away doesn't look like slamming a door. Sometimes it looks like folding a blanket, turning off the lamp, and sleeping soundly for the first time in your life. You would think that freedom would feel like fireworks, like noise, like the high note at the end of a song. But it didn't. For me, it felt like Tuesday, a quiet morning, bare feet on cold tile, the click of the kettle, the soft creak of an open window letting in crisp air that smelled like the end of summer. No grand epiphanies, no swelling music, just stillness, and the slow, steady rhythm of a life that belonged entirely to me. I stood in the middle of my kitchen with a pen and a yellow notepad and asked myself the question I hadn't dared to before. What do I want? Not what will make them happy, not what keeps things peaceful, not what looks good from the outside, but me, Margaret, the woman beneath the titles. At first, the answers came small. I want fresh bread in the morning. I want to take a class that has nothing to do with productivity. I want to go to sleep without replaying conversations in my head, editing myself for the version of me they prefer. Then the list grew bolder. I want to stop paying for things I'm not emotionally invited into. I want to live in a space where I'm not walking on eggshells, even in my thoughts. I want silence that feels like sanctuary, not punishment. I sat with the list for a long time. Not because I doubted it, but because it felt so new. For decades, my wants had been shaped around theirs, like clay molded to fit the gaps they left behind. Now I was reshaping myself, not in opposition, not in spite, just in truth. That afternoon, I opened my laptop and started researching cabins, not luxurious retreats, just small places, quiet ones, A-frame homes with good insulation, a porch where I could sit in the morning with tea, a wood stove for winter, enough space for a desk and bookshelves and solitude. I didn't tell anyone, not because I was hiding, but because it was mine, all mine. In the days that followed, I went on walks with no destination. I visited bookstores and didn't rush. I unsubscribed from family updates. I took long baths and stayed in the water until it turned lukewarm. I started saying no without explanation, and yes without guilt. One day I passed a thrift store and spotted an old painting in the window. It was of a winding path through a forest, the trees bathed in autumn gold. The kind of art most people would call outdated or unremarkable. But I loved it, because it reminded me of something no one else needed to understand. So I bought it, carried it home in both hands like it was fragile and precious. And maybe it was. It now hangs in my hallway. Every time I pass it, I smile, not because it's beautiful, but because I chose it, with no audience, with no applause, just instinct. That was the shift. Learning to live not for their reaction, but for my resonance. I didn't need to be impressive. I just needed to be honest. The strangest part? No one noticed right away. No protests, no sudden knocks on my door, no big dramatic confrontation. Because when you stop playing the role they cast you in, the stage doesn't collapse. It just dims. And in the quiet that follows, you realize something profound. You were never part of the story. You were just holding the spotlight. So I set it down and stepped into the dark, where it turned out I could finally see myself. The letter arrived on a Thursday. Not an email, not a text, an actual letter, handwritten, folded neatly, tucked into a simple white envelope with no return address. I almost didn't open it. There's something sacred about silence, and I'd spent weeks carefully building mine. Quiet mornings, soft evenings, days without apologies I didn't ask for. But curiosity is a stubborn thing. So I opened it. The handwriting was slanted, careful. Mail. The kind of script that belonged to someone who rarely put pen to paper but tried to make it count when he did. It was from Logan. He didn't waste time. Margaret, I won't pretend I deserve your attention, but I needed to write this. Not to explain, not to fix, just to say it. Finally. I read the first paragraph slowly, unsure of where it would go. I knew what your family was doing. I saw it. Even before the wedding. The way they edited you out of everything like you were a shadow that made them uncomfortable. I should have said something, but I didn't. I was too busy trying to keep my place in their story. That line hit harder than I expected. He continued. The truth is, I admired you. You never tried to outshine anyone. You never played their game. You were just steady. And somehow, they mistook that steadiness for invisibility. I paused there, took a breath. That was the thing about being steady. Everyone depended on you, but no one remembered to thank the ground for not collapsing. After the wedding, I realized something I should have seen earlier. You weren't cold. You were surviving. That sentence sat in my chest for a long time. Because he was right. For so long, they called me distant, quiet, difficult to reach. But what they never asked was why I'd built the distance. What it had cost me to protect the parts of myself that no one ever asked to know. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope you find peace in places where you don't have to disappear to be loved, and if you ever think of me, I hope it's as someone who finally saw you. Not too late, but just in time to let you go. Logan. I folded the letter and sat with it for a while. It was not redemption. It was not repair. It was recognition. And that was enough. Because I didn't need him to fix what he didn't break. I just needed the truth said out loud, not for closure, but for clarity. Later that evening, I took the letter and placed it inside a box I kept in the back of my closet. It wasn't a memory box. I didn't believe in those anymore. It was more like a boundary box, a place for the things I've outgrown, but still want to remember once in a while, not with longing, but with peace. Afterward, I went for a walk. The air was warm for autumn, a gentle breeze curling through the trees, leaves crunched under my boots. The sky held that particular shade of gold that only lasts 10 minutes before fading to gray. As I walked, I thought about how many apologies I used to beg for without ever asking. How many conversations I'd rewritten in my head, trying to make them land softer. Now, I didn't need anyone to make it right, because I was no longer carrying the wrong. I let Logan's letter exist exactly where it belonged. In the past, marked by a kindness that came too late to change anything, but early enough not to ruin it. I didn't hate him. I didn't miss him. I just released him. That night, as I climbed into bed, I left my phone in the kitchen. No alarms, no alerts, only sleep. Soft, earned, undisturbed. It came quietly, as most endings do. A voicemail from my father. Not long, maybe 30 seconds. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't plead. Your mother's worried. I am too. Things have gotten a little tense since the wedding. We know it wasn't right, the way things happened. But this family's been through a lot. Maybe you can come over this weekend, talk things through. Just us. I replayed it twice. Not because I was uncertain, but because I wanted to be sure of how certain I felt. There was a time that message would have sent me packing an overnight bag. A time when I would have baked something, prepared talking points, rehearsed a dozen ways to make myself heard without making anyone uncomfortable. But that version of me didn't live here anymore. I didn't respond right away. I sat with it. I brewed tea, washed the dishes, watered the plant in the corner that somehow still bloomed, despite years of neglect. Then I opened my laptop. I didn't write an email or search for forgiveness quotes. I opened a document and titled it, What I Will No Longer Carry. I listed things like unpaid emotional labor, the weight of being the understanding one, their discomfort with my boundaries, their silence when I needed presence, their guilt, which is not mine to soothe, and then I opened another document and titled it, What I'm Creating Instead. I wrote, Time that is mine. Conversations that nourish, solitude that restores, a home that reflects who I am, not who I've been to them. That's when I made the decision. I called a real estate agent the next morning. I'm looking for something small, I said. Quiet, maybe near the coast. He asked the usual questions, budget, size, timeline. I answered each one without hesitation, because I wasn't running anymore. I was walking, slowly, surely, towards something of my own. Later that day, I sent my parents a message. Not dramatic, not emotional, just clear. Hi, I got your message. I appreciate you reaching out. Right now, I'm not in a place where I can re-enter family conversations that haven't changed. If and when I do, it'll be because the dynamic is different, not just the tone. Until then, I wish you both peace. Margaret. I didn't wait for a reply, and I didn't need one, because this wasn't a test, it was a truth. I had spent most of my life afraid to name what hurt me, afraid that honesty would shatter the thin glass of family unity we all pretended was unbreakable. But it turns out it had already shattered, quietly. Years ago. I'd just been the one holding the shards together with bleeding hands. Now I let them fall. And there was no crash, just space. That weekend, instead of going home, I drove 2 hours north to look at a cottage tucked into the trees. White trim, weathered shingles, a porch that overlooked nothing but sky and pine. When I stepped inside, the agent asked if I wanted to wait to make a decision. I didn't. "This is it," I said. He smiled. "You sure?" I nodded. "I've never been more." I wake up to the sound of birds I don't recognize. Not city birds, not the kind that fight for scraps near parking lots. These ones sing like they have time. The window's open. The air smells like cedar and something faintly sweet I haven't identified yet. I'll figure it out eventually. But not today. Today, I don't need all the answers. I'm in the new house. It's small, quiet, the kind of quiet that wraps around you instead of pressing down. There's a porch with a rocking chair, a fireplace I don't quite know how to use yet, a kitchen with just enough space for what I actually need. No one knows the address. Not yet. That's not a punishment. It's a pause. I make tea and step outside, barefoot on the wood planks. The sky is soft and pale like the first page of something unwritten. There's no plan for today. I might finish the book I started last week. Or not. I might walk the trail behind the house just to see where it goes. Or not. For the first time in my life, every option feels like mine. I'm not waiting to be chosen. I'm not proving anything. I'm not performing stability for people who never asked how I built it. This isn't a new chapter. It's an entirely different book. Written slowly, in my own handwriting. One morning at a time. Some evenings, I sit on the porch and let the world turn without me. I don't check the news. I don't scroll through headlines or group chats. I let the day end on its own terms. There's something beautiful about not knowing everything. About not needing to. Last night it rained for the first time since I moved in. A soft, steady sound on the roof, the kind that makes you feel like the house is exhaling. I lit a candle, curled up on the couch, and read until I couldn't keep my eyes open. I've stopped measuring my days by how productive they are. Now I measure them in peace, in how many times I caught myself smiling without noticing, in how slowly I brewed my coffee, in whether or not I remembered to look up at the sky. Sometimes I bake, even though I'm the only one who'll eat it. Sometimes I talk out loud just to hear the sound of my own voice filling the room. It used to feel silly. Now it feels like proof I'm here. There's a chair by the window I never sit in. I just like that it's there, waiting, empty, mine. No one asks where I am. No one needs anything from me. And that isn't lonely. It's sacred. The house is quiet, but not silent. There's the creak of the floor when I walk barefoot, the low hum of the refrigerator, the wind tapping its fingers against the screen door like it's asking permission to come in. I let it. I let everything in now, slowly, carefully, only what feels right. Healing, I've learned, isn't loud. It's not a speech or a single breakthrough. It's the decision, made over and over, to stay with yourself. Even when no one's watching, especially then. Some people spend their whole lives waiting for a moment to arrive, a moment when someone finally sees them, when someone finally says, "You belong." But here's what I've learned. Sometimes, that moment never comes. And still, you are allowed to build your life anyway. You're allowed to walk away from the table where your name was never on the place card. You're allowed to choose quiet over chaos. You are allowed to stop explaining why you feel what you feel. You don't need permission to protect your peace. You don't need to earn rest or joy or space. You just need to decide that the old roles no longer fit, that love without respect is not love at all, that showing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's sacred. I don't know who needed to hear this today, but I hope you do one thing for yourself this week. Just one. Say no without a reason. Turn your phone off for the evening. Buy yourself flowers and don't post about it. Sit in silence and ask yourself not, "What do they need from me?" but "What do I need from me?" Then listen, really listen, because I promise you, the quiet will answer if you let it. And when it does, don't be afraid to follow. You don't have to set everything on fire to start again. Sometimes all you have to do is leave the door open and walk out, softly, steadily, fully yourself. If this story found something inside you, if it made you feel seen even just for a moment, leave a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from, or just type, "I'm choosing myself." And if you haven't already, subscribe for more stories like this. Not about revenge, not about drama, but about becoming. Because sometimes the best kind of power is peace.